We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today, Monday, February 4th, 2019. I would ask if anyone does have any cell phones or other electronic devices to please make sure that they're on vibrate or silent or turned off so we can keep the distractions to a minimum. Roll call, please.
Janser?
Here.
Olson? Here. Pittner?
Here.
Padragula?
Here.
Straight?
Here.
Wolski?
Here.
Sitma?
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Takes us to number 3 on our agenda, personal appearances. This is the opportunity at the City Council meeting for anyone who may be here to talk about something that isn't on our agenda tonight to come up to the dais and ask questions, make comments, what have you. So if there's someone in the audience that does want to address any other issue that is not on our agenda, I would certainly invite you to come forward. And if you do, we just ask that you say in your name and address so that we can have it for public record. Anyone at all? All right, moving on. Number 4 to the mayor's report. First and foremost, before I get into the heart of that, I do understand that we do have a number of Boy Scouts that are in the audience that are getting more than likely a badge for either communications or for government services. So if you guys would please stand up. Thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it to be involved. Is there anyone among you that would want to say anything about that badge? Didn't think so. Okay. Hang on one moment. Let's see if I can figure this out. Where's my Giving Hearts Day, folks? Why don't you come up? And hopefully somebody's going to be taking a few pictures for you. Okay, so the City of Minot has proclaiming February 14th as Giving Hearts Day. This is the official proclamation for the City of Minot, whereas the goal of Giving Hearts Day is to raise awareness of the charitable nonprofit sector and the organizations here in Minot, North Dakota, to promote online giving and to provide donors with the opportunity to multiply the results of their giving. And whereas Giving Hearts Day is a powerful example of the private sector providing much-needed assistance to charitable nonprofits, organizations, and then offer vital services to improve the quality of life to many members within the community. Whereas the charitable nonprofit sector supports the individual and family with quality programs, materials, and funds that promote and encourage the self-sufficiency. Whereas all of those that benefit the benefits that serve and strengthen our community. Whereas in order to provide these benefits, charities need ongoing funds in order to provide long-term sustainable services to our residents in need. And whereas these charities have demonstrated a need for the collaboration and resources and have joined together for this 24-hour fundraising event that is dedicated to inspire the online donations for charities at impactgiving.org. Now, therefore, do I, Sean Sitma, the mayor of Minot, hereby proclaim February 14th, 2019 as the Giving Hearts Day in Minot and call upon the public officials, businesses, and community leaders, the educators, and all Minot residents to observe this day with appreciate activities and programs, recognize charitable nonprofits and their staff and volunteers who provide the essential services to our community, and support Giving Hearts Day by taking time and action to volunteer and make financial donations to local charities in Minot and Central North Dakota at givingheartsday.org. Thank you so much for being part of our community and to being part of Giving Hearts Day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right.
And also don't forget that Giving Hearts Day is the same day as Valentine's Day, so don't forget the other one. The last piece of my report today is my schedule from the last City Council meeting. Aside from numerous emails, many phone calls with city business, with personnel and people of Minot, also with individual staff members. On January 8th, I attended the ribbon cutting at the Minot VA Clinic. On January 9th, the Blighted Home closing. January 10th, Committee on Addiction. January 14th, the Honorary Commander Ceremony at Minot Air Force Base. On January 15th, testified at the North Dakota Legislature on bills regarding House Bill 1066, the Prairie Dog Bill, and the continuing Resolution 4005 in the Senate for the revolving loan from part of the principal from the Legacy Fund for flood control. On the 16th, met with the new director of the Minot Burdick Job Corps. Also on the 16th, attended the stakeholders report at the Minot Auditorium. On the 21st, the Minot Monocean podcast interview. On January 22nd, testified at the North Dakota Legislature on Senate Bill 2275 regarding the Legacy Fund revolving loan, and met with our local legislators that were available. On the 23rd, the YP lunch with the Speaker, the Medal of Honor recipient Clint Romeshay. On the 23rd as well, the stakeholders report at the auditorium. The 24th MADC board meeting, the 25th, the American Legion State Conference that was held at the Minot Grand, where I provided the opening remarks and greetings for their state meeting. On the 26th, the Legislative Forum. The 29th, the Sources of Strength table host at the Minot Auditorium. The State of the City on the 31st, and I will finish with that one and encourage anyone who has not had the opportunity to go online and preview the State of the City in its entirety. But more so, I want to give the congratulations and show a significant amount of appreciation for the staff members that put a tremendous amount of time and effort after hours to make sure that it went as well as it did. So thank you so much to our staff for helping out, because I always say that you put those people that beside you or in front of you that only make you look better, and they certainly do that. The last one is February 1st, Blighted Home closing, aside from the rest of the numerous meetings that I had with staff. So with that, that is my city mayor report, and I will turn it over to our city manager for his report today.
Well, good evening, Mayor and council members. It's time to do the city manager's report. It's February. Just jump right in here. A couple days to remember, as we always do at the start of these reports. I wanted to remind everyone about tomorrow night's meeting to continue the conversation with the IEDC Interagency Stakeholder Group. That will start at 6:30 in the auditorium. We're changing the room to room number 201, so you want to make that note. The Zoning Ordinance Steering Committee will meet on the 13th at 8 o'clock. The library merger meeting, we haven't met for some time, but that will be held at 2 o'clock on the 13th. City Council next will happen on the 19th, again, 5:30 in this room. And then Planning Commission on the 25th, and then Zoning and Steering Committee again on the 27th. Renaissance Zone Board will meet at 8:30 on the 28th. So that being said, we'll just start right into it and talk about the state of the city just very quickly. Nearly 200 folks attended the event, very well attended. We appreciate those who showed up and participated in that event. As you all know, mostly for the viewing public's sake, we had a 45-minute open house, like City Hall open house. We had all the different directors and departments represented at the open house. We also had the mayor provide a state of the city address, and then afterwards we had the social hour where we had music, entertainment, and we had light hors d'oeuvres. So I thought that went very well. Despite the fact 200 folks attended, based on the viewership, nearly 2,000 folks have watched the State of the City, at least in some portion or some part. And I think that's a testament of the interest that our community has in what the city's saying about our community and the state of our organization. We did hand out an annual report at the State of the City address. We had about 220 copies. We don't have very many hard copies left, but what we have done is created a PDF of this document and uploaded it to our website so anyone in the community, or anywhere in the world for that matter, can upload or download rather, the annual report and have all the detail behind the numbers and the accomplishments that the city was able to achieve over last year's period. We have been very busy at the state capitol. This is only my second legislative session in my time with the city, but it is a busy one, I am told. Almost record-setting. There's been over almost 1,000 bills that have been introduced in the first 6.5, 7 weeks of the legislative session. We have been tracking close to 200 of those, which may in some way, shape, or form influence or impact the city. We have provided testimony on about 24 different legislative bills. So I, the staff, some of you, our council members, and certainly the mayor have gone down and testified. I'm very grateful for your willingness to do that. There are some important pieces of legislation that will help the city and some that won't. So it's important for our voice to be heard down at the Capitol, and I appreciate that we're making a strong presence down there. There are some resources that the community may be interested in, so that's why I pull up this slide here. We have a lot of information that we're sharing about the legislative session on our website. We've created a legislative resources webpage where our position papers and official testimony is all being uploaded to the system. We have quick contact information. We have bill tracking and all sorts of things like that that can be gotten through either the North Dakota League of Cities website and certainly our website as well. The legislative session is in full swing. We are approaching crossover, which is the point in time where bills that started in the House and bills that started in the Senate swap sides. So that'll happen on February the 22nd. After that, there will be the session will continue, and then there will be a point in time where maybe conference committees will be developed and additional refinements to bills and whatnot will be had. We expect that this session, which is mandated to only last 80 days, 80 working days, will end around April 26th. So our work is long and far ahead of us, and we're going to continue to remain resolute about all of the issues and concerns and opportunities that exist for us down at the State House. Some of those bills that we've testified on in one house, we will have to be back and testify again on the other side of the house. So we'll keep you in the loop as to what that schedule looks like when they get when those schedules get set out. Also wanted to mention, I did send in your email boxes last week a update of the 2018 goals document, about 56 pages worth of different goals and initiatives that we, the staff, have been working on over this last year. This is a summary sheet showing that we have achieved about 77% of all the goals that we set out to achieve. This number runs about the same as it did for 2017. I would like to see the number up just a little bit more than 77%, but it is still a very good and positive number. I'm proud of the staff, and in some cases, the work that was not completed was replaced with additional work that became the priority throughout the year, so I do want to mention that. We are in the process of setting our 2019 objectives and goals for next year. We're wrapping up that document currently, and I do hope to be able to provide that to you before the end of this month, so you'll know kind of what we'll be setting our sights on. I will be stretching the staff a little bit, be stretching the organization. I've mentioned this in the December report, that we're essentially going to be working on making adjustments to our operation that are going to be meaningful and long-lasting, and focusing on performance improvements as well. So expect to hear a lot more about that as we go throughout the year, and certainly by the end of the year. And it is my hope that we will be able to set some time aside, particularly with you, council members, to work on a strategic plan for the city. I'm hopeful that maybe a council retreat in May time or so would be in order. And we're going to try to get through this legislative session. I've mentioned that before. Use maybe April to tee up some important issues, and then go ahead and launch a council retreat sometime in May. So that's what we're looking for. I want to give you a quick update on some financial or operational insights. First of all, the enterprise-wide system software platform project is just about ready to launch. We have developed a request for proposal, an RFP, and that will be let sometime this month. We have several vendors that are essentially interested, or providers that are interested, and we're hopeful that we'll get a good response to this. This will be a fundamental shift in the way that we think and plan and do work in the city. It'll be a huge technological advancement for our city and allow us to take a more robust, data-driven approach to all that we do and to improve the customer interfaces with our customers by having data at our fingertips. It'll also be able to provide to us, we hope, dashboarding capabilities and a way to quickly and easily evaluate performance across the city. Another thing that's noteworthy is sales taxes. We did have a projection, as we do every year for sales taxes and other taxes. The projections for the end of last year came in a little bit lower than actuals, which is good news. So we had a 6% year-over-year increase from essentially end of fourth quarter in 2017 to end of fourth quarter 2018, which means we posted about $2.8 million more in sales tax revenue than we expected. So that's great news. That's even better news because we have not yet seen the full ramifications of the collection and increases of sales taxes through online purchases. So we're hopeful that that number will grow again this year. The flood control project continues, but that is a project that we're going to need to talk more about as it relates to how we want to allocate our sales taxes. And in particular, part of the conversation, which seems to be kind of churning in our community and with some of you council members, is, what kind of monies should we be looking at to set aside not just for the capital construction piece, but what should we set aside also for betterments and for maintenance and operations of the improvements that we're going to be constructing. So that will be a conversation that will evolve probably throughout this year, and we'll have plenty of time to be discussing that. We are focused at the moment on legislation that will help us better inform that discussion. And so you won't see probably much attention given to that part of the conversation until after the legislative session. We did implement the purchase card, or what we call the P cards, throughout the city. We're already starting to save money by purchases. More than that, and maybe I should just touch, we expect to save about $100,000 annually through the implementation of the P card program. But more important than that, we are bringing an elevated level of accountability to purchases throughout the city. We are tightening down the controls for purchasing of goods and services throughout our community and making sure that we have better accountability with what's being purchased and how that purchase is being used for the advancement of the city and its operation. So that's good news as well. And lastly on this slide, I wanted to touch on the overhaul of the 5-year capital improvement plan. We are putting finishing touches, as I've promised, onto this plan. There are some pretty exciting information that I think you'll appreciate once we develop this plan. It will be a work in process for probably the next 2 years, but we will give you the basics in this first iteration, and then the next iteration, which will likely come November and December of this year, will have a market improvement, and then we'll kind of continue along that road. But I think it'll give you and it'll give our citizens, our community, and our partners in construction and engineering and architecture and whatnot, our consultants, an opportunity to have a window into what it is that might be coming up and allow them to prepare for putting together strong proposals for competing for that work. Lastly here, I wanted to focus a little bit of time on the community rating system, or the CRS system. This is through the National Flood Insurance Program. We have been recertified as a Class 8 rating, and that's important for us because with every class reduction, we pick up a 5% discount on flood insurance. So currently we're running about a 10% discount under the community rating system. We do have some work in process that we hope will lower our CRS rating to a 7 and possibly a 6, picking up another 5 to possibly 10% reduction on flood insurance premiums for insurance. So anyway, we are continuing that work. It's important work. It means a lot to our community given the fact that our FEMA maps are being updated and are soon to be published again. The IEDC, or International Economic Development Council, activities associated with the report findings are well underway. As you know, because many of you have participated in this, we have completed all the technical team reports. There were 7 technical teams that were put together, and each one of those teams provided a report over the last several weeks. Tomorrow night's meeting will be to talk about synthesizing that information and identifying what the gaps are, getting the community to agree what those gaps are for economic development, and trying to figure out which organization is going to be best to fill those gaps, and what umbrella organization might we want to consider as we take on the broader work and carry it forward in our community. So tomorrow night is an important meeting. We do hope to hold that or to have that televised, so that those who can't make it will at least have an opportunity to see what was discussed and all of that. We'll have to see tomorrow night, given our progress, as to whether or not another meeting or 2 may be scheduled, because it could be a long conversation. So we want to make sure we have ample time to cover that. We do have a new website, or web page, I should say, that we've uploaded all the technical team reports to. We've uploaded the videos of the past meetings, the IEDC report, the report findings, the executive summary, all of that. And that's on the website address here that's on the screen in front of you. And so I'd encourage anybody in the community to go look at that if they're interested in this work. So with that, that's all I have for you, and I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Any questions? Yes, Alderman Wolski.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Barry, a brief but technical question perhaps. In terms of sales tax and the reporting we get back from the state on a monthly basis, have they given us a sense of when we expect to see the online collections start to be reflected in those numbers? Has it started to happen yet? Do we know the answer to that?
Well, I know that they're collecting it, and they keep registering new businesses that are obligated to collect that tax and pass it on to the state. They've been doing that since October 1st, but we really still do not have any indication as to what the amounts are going to be for our community. And we do hope that we get that information fairly soon, because that would be helpful in us putting together the next budget. I would imagine by the time we're putting together the 2020 budget, we will have that information well in hand.
If I may,
yes,
Mr.
Senior,
Mayor.
please.
Tom, I follow the city's online database spreadsheet that Mr. Lakefield keeps. I greatly appreciate that. It allows me to kind of see year over year and month over month trends. If there's any way to just sort of get an idea, put an asterisk next to these months when we become certain that the online collections have started. Okay. Just for my sake, I guess, would appreciate being able to tell when that change takes place. So.
Yeah, you bet. That's a great idea. Thank you, Alderman Wolski.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tom, kind of piggybacking on Alderman Wolski's point, what are we doing within the city to, I don't know, cross-reference those online sales with, I know in the past when we've had businesses in town that have not been paying sales tax, and the staff have had to kind of follow up to kind of cross-reference and double-check. What do we have to do within that to be sure that we are keenly aware of the businesses that are participating or not? I recognize, obviously, that seems like a fairly laborious task for someone within the state, but I'm wondering, what are we doing locally to ensure that we're getting what is owed to us?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, that's a great question. It's going to be very, very, very difficult for us to have any kind of level of accountability or reporting straight to the city about what online sales taxes are due to the city. That is a state function. They're collecting that on our behalf, just as they do other sales taxes and like gas taxes and other sorts of taxes. And so we more or less have to rely on the state to provide that information. We can ask questions when we get the information, given the format and given maybe some inquiry around how it's put together. But the state right now isn't quite sure even how to designate. I know that they're going to attempt to designate online sales tax revenues and keep those separate from local sales tax revenues so that we can track that. We are hopeful that that'll give us some insights as to what you're referring to. But for the Amazons and the other online things that maybe there isn't a presence here in the state for collection of those, it'll be difficult for us to have any sort of oversight, and therefore to maybe have the sense of accountability that I think you might be looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. Any further questions for our city manager? Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
The last part of number 5 is our city attorney's report.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I submitted a written report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for our city attorney? Seeing none, we move on to number 6 on our agenda. Consider the report of the Planning Commission. We had 4 items. I've been asked to pull number 2 and number 3 for discussion. Is there anyone else that would like any other items pulled out of the Planning Commissions? Yes, Alderman Janser.
I don't need anything pulled out, but I would move 1 and 4.
We have a motion to approve as they came out of Planning Commission, second by Alderman Pittner. Any discussion on number 1 and number 4, or the motion by Alderman Janser on 1 and 4? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion approved. That takes us to number 2 of the Planning Commission. Approve the subdivision of a family recreation addition Lot 1 and pass an ordinance on first reading to change the zone from the AG to P on a family recreation addition Lot 1 and pass an ordinance on first reading to annex into the city limits family addition Lot 1 and adopt a resolution to amend the future land use map to change from a low density to medium density residential to parks and open space. Alderman Janser.
Move the item.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Olson. Discussion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Quick comments on this. One, I support the item. I greatly appreciate the rationale behind the Park District on this one in terms of not continuing to make investments in rebuilding Souris Valley Golf Course in what at some point in the future will be another flood that's very costly to put that course back together. And I think it's important for us to, on the whole, support the work of our partner political subdivisions in town here. I do want to share a concern that I have with this particular project in how it's going to impact we, the city, and our role in this area. You know, we've talked many times about outward development and being conscious of that. When we put a new golf course out on the edge of town, I think there is a strong likelihood that we will see increased development in this area. And so I think we just need to be conscious of that and thoughtful as those proposals come before us. I think it will put particular pressure on the need to develop the Northwest Fire Station because this area is, I would say, certainly on the fringes of our best response times right now. And so I wanted to call those couple of points to our attention. Once again, I support this item, but I think we need to be very deliberate in how we think about the development in this part of town.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. That takes us to number 3, pass an ordinance on first reading to change the zone from C2 to M1 on the Lafarge Addition Block 2. Also adopt a resolution to amend the comprehensive future land use map.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Any discussion on the item? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, if I may, I would request our principal planner, Mr. Lang.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Lance, just a little bit of a question. In this particular neighborhood, it seems like we may be going a couple different directions. There was a ag lot just to the south of this that I think we kind of designated a little closer to C. Now we're kind of back down on the street, backing out, going the other direction. Any particular thoughts on where we're going here? I appreciate us being accommodating for business. I guess I'm just a little concerned that we're getting a little picking and choosing in these projects.
Yes, Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski. This is a mixed-use area, if you've been over there and looked. And the prior project you're referring to is a residential project, right, for the old farmhouse that has been rezoned for R2, which would be for duplexes or condominiums or that kind of thing. And then down the street a ways, there's commercial and industrial development, and there's actually the golf course across the street, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the area. This particular Lafarge Block 2 has been used for industrial use for many years. I don't know really how it got zoned commercial. It used to be a concrete plant, to my knowledge, before I was here. And then more recently, it was a fracking, fracking sand operation for oil fields. And the people that would like to now buy it also have an oil field business, but it's a trucking business that's run with large pickups like F-550s. They're out in the field most of the time, and they're wanting to screen it off with a fence all the way around it and improve the property. And so, given the history of it, there's also a rail spur that goes along with this property, which is indicative of industrial use. So there's commercial and industrial use in the area. There's some industrial zoning just on the other side of the street. Is it Nash Finch, I believe, has a big trucking facility there. So there's a mixture of uses. And given the context of the site and the mixture of uses around it, the staff discussed this, and we're in support of the rezoning and the land use map amendment. Of course, that could be overturned at your discretion if you feel that it's not appropriate.
Continue, Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Lang, thank you for your comments. No, I don't, but I did just, it caught my attention that in this sort of immediate area, it felt like we were going slightly different directions with regards to some things. Like I said, I support it, but I wanted to get your comments.
I appreciate that. And Mayor Sitma and Alderman Wolski, there are several areas in town that we have some mixed use issues, and maybe the uses aren't really in line with what the zoning should be or what we think they should be. So when we get around to the next round of the comprehensive plan update, we have some of those kind of in our back pocket that we know we really need to address at that time. So hopefully in the next few years, we'll be taking a closer look at some of those areas of town.
Any further questions for Principal Planner? Thank you, Mr. Lang. Appreciate it. Any further discussion on the item? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion approved. That takes us to our number 7 on our agenda, which is our consent items. I've been asked to pull 7.9 out of our consent. I would certainly hear a motion. Alderman Janser.
Mayor, I'd move the remaining consent items.
Second.
That is motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Olson. For those in the audience, all of the items in our number 7, with the exception of 7.9, will be passed on consent unless someone from the audience would like an item, one of those items pulled individually. It will be passed with recommendations. Discussion on the motion. Please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. 7.9 is permission to use GovDeals online auction for disposal of excess equipment in an effort to maximize the revenue that the city receives from the sales of excess vehicles and equipment. We have researched the online auction website specializing in the sale of excess government equipment and request the option of using GovDeal auction online website for the purpose of disposing of excess city vehicles and or equipment.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Wolski.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Brief comment request. As we get into this process and start using this, I would simply request as a policy that we also provide notification through our social media presences and maybe even the city website that we are advertising and selling these goods. I don't know what state law requires in this area, but if there are opportunities, I want to make sure local folks are at least aware of them.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Any further discussion on the item? Please call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion approved. That takes us to number 8 on our agenda. We'll take these items individually. Action items number 8.1 is the purchase of a skid steer loaders, project number 4414.
So moved.
Second.
Move to approve by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the item. Alderman Wolski.
Perhaps a question, I would say, likely for our Public Works Director.
Sending up the right-hander from the bullpen. Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Sorensen, thank you. My reading of this is, Jason, once we finish this particular deal, then the entirety of our skid steer fleet is going to be in this exchange program. Is that the correct understanding?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski, yes, for the most part. I think we probably have one department that they don't put a lot of hours on there, so they're pretty content with just using the one they have. But yeah, we pretty much have all of our loaders now on this trade program.
Okay. Continuation. Do we have an expectation? I mean, how many skid steers is that? And then what are we expecting on an annual basis from here forward in terms of participating in this exchange program? Obviously, the prices reflected in the memo are very good, those types of things. And I'm just curious, on an ongoing annual basis, do we have a sense of how many skid steers and what an annual cost?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski, I think total we're probably exchanging about 5 or 6 total between water department, street department. That would be the bulk of them. And most of them are trading, around. It depends on the hours. In the memo, you can see there it's a tiered rate depending on how many hours we put on. The one in the water department, it's probably about $2,500 a year to trade. We have some smaller ones that we're doing sidewalks with. They're only $1,000 a year, and then this one here is like $3,500, $4,500, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
Any further questions for Jason? Thank you, Mr. Sorensen. Any further discussion on the item? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. Number 8.2, the right-of-way encroachment application monitoring wells 1700 and 1704 23rd Avenue Northwest.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the item. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion is approved. That takes us to 8.3. This is project number 3529.3A. This is the MREFPP Phase B. That is a lot of acronyms here. BU1A Colton Avenue Bridge. The replacement of the Colton Avenue Bridge is part of the overall Mouse River Plan. The project was initially programmed to be part of the Burlington Levee Project. Recommendation for approval from the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Olson, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Alderman Wolski.
Brief comment on this one, Mayor. I support this project. I'm going to be voting yes on this. I also support the basin-wide border-to-border philosophy that the South River Joint Board has delivered to us through the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Project. I do continue to remain concerned that it is only mine-op businesses that are asked to assess their customers in paying for these local shares. I know that conversation is working its way through the system, and I appreciate that happening, but there's just the local cost share associated with this project continues to be a bit of a concern for me. So I just wanted to call attention to that.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Further discussion, Alderman Padrigula.
It's such an important issue that I guess I wanted to second Josh's comments. I mean, realistically, the sales tax or other kinds of revenues from the outlying counties will be pretty small compared to ours, but I think it's important that this is a basin-wide project, and I think people should contribute to it on a basin-wide basis, too.
Thank you, Alderman Padrigula. Further discussion. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sim. I guess just to piggyback on the importance that Minot plays in this, I'm now receiving phone calls from folks outside of Minot with their concerns about this project, which I find is intriguing, but also I've been very clear. I try to attend as many of those SRJ meetings as I can that I am in full support of the basin-wide project, and I think the more we can work with Dan, Ryan in particular, and how we deal with these outside rural issues, the greater likelihood that we're not going to end up in court and hold this project up, because that obviously is my greatest concern for those of us on the east side of Minot that are concerned about not just how we're going to fund it, but buyout dollars from the state, how we're going to move ahead. So I hear our fellow aldermen's concerns, and I too have my own, but I'm going to keep being very supportive and of the project, and let's keep moving ahead.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. Alderman Walski of
One more brief follow-up here. I very much appreciate it, Mayor Sitma. Again, I don't want the fact that I have called attention to these concerns to be the primary point here. I'm going to be voting in support of this because I believe Minot's commitment to this basin-wide project is important. It has been the right path in the past, and we need to continue that. But I do share concern. I do have concerns that maybe in even possibly an unbearable portion of the local share is being accepted upon our shoulders. And so with that, I will gladly and vigorously support this item.
Thank you, Alderman Walski. Any further discussion on the motion? It was well outlined in the State of the City as well. Please call a roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion approved. 8.4 was pulled from our agenda this evening. That takes us to 8.5, which is the approved Minot Area Community Foundation Land Trust Subrecipient Agreement.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Straight.
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the item. Alderman Walski.
Maybe Mr. Zakian could step forward here.
Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Alderman Walski.
Mr. Zakian, flight delay prevented you from being at the meeting last month, but we did have some concerns come forward on what will actually be our next agenda item. But as this item, I think, is directly related in terms of the city adding more housing units into a market that is already under, some would probably argue, overbuilt and has a fairly high vacancy rate. What assurances do we have that these projects are not going to move forward at a particular time when the market, frankly, can't bear it? Do we have the authority to sort of greenlight these things on an as-needed basis?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Walski, the answer is yes. In both this one and the one that I guess I'll be discussing next. And again, I apologize. I literally missed my connection was, my flight connection was an hour and a half delayed, and I literally missed the connection to Minot by 3 frustrating minutes. Otherwise, I would have been here. Yes, the agreement is designed so that we control the entire process. Funding is going to be by house, and until we and our partner, the land trust, are convinced there is a market for the next house or the next 2 houses, we're not going to proceed. Let me make it clear that we do not, under any of our contracts or agreements, do lump sum payments. All payments are done on a reimbursable basis. So until and unless each component of the project is green-lighted and goes forward, and the expenses are actually incurred and the goal is accomplished, we don't make payments. So there is an extreme check and balance.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. Further questions? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. John, can you speak to the issue that we have with not having a local presence? I have some concerns about us paying funds to the subrecipient. maybe just to back up, and I think the land trust is a valuable tool. I think it's important that we have one in town. I'm just curious about the agreement that we have in relation to the fact that our local entity doesn't necessarily is picking up the responsibility, and that we're paying the Grand Forks team basically to be kind of keeping tabs on this, I guess.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Strait, again, another good question. And to the credit of both land trusts, both the Grand Forks one, which is the heart and soul, but also the Minot Land Trust, which is a separate and distinct entity. That's been recognized. There was a presence here right after the flood, but because of various reasons we don't have to go into, it's part of the past history, they had to throttle back. Part of this agreement, and to their credit, they accepted it, is that there has to be a presence. And it's spelled out in the subrecipient agreement. And when I say presence, I mean staff.
Thanks for the continuation, Mr. Mayor. John, I guess my concern also is the fact that we're paying this, correct me if I'm wrong, out of NDR funds, correct?
That is correct.
So at some point, the NDR funds 2022 are going to be gone. What's our long-term ability to keep this program going? We're obviously able to fund it now because we have this fantastic grant before us, but do you have any concerns moving forward of how we're not going to be able to continue to pay for our support of this program?
Mayor Sitman, Alderman Strait, I have that, it's not a concern, it's on my radar for a number of the programs that are really being received well in the city and how we go forward, but that's really a 2020 question. I would say, and I don't want to keep pushing back in this, but I share the mayor's optimism on this. This would be an ideal program. Should we become an entitlement city? And we should know that next year. And I have confidence we have a good shot at it. Then these types of programs are exactly the type of programs that are funded by entitlement cities.
Further questions for Mr. Zakian? One.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mr. Zakian, let's project, right now I don't see a demand, but let's project into the future a little bit and imagine one, a beautiful one where there is a demand, because I think that's a sign that Minot's trending in a very positive direction. Do you have a sense of what the criteria might look like in terms of what would trigger your green lighting these projects to move forward? Any sense of what that metric might look like?
Mayor Sitman, Alderman Walski, well, let's put it in context. This agreement only calls for 10 houses. Mm-hmm. And this agreement also specifies that it can either be rehab of existing houses outside of the floodplain or new houses outside of the floodplain. And this agreement only specifies that 4 of the 10 have to be new houses. Now, even in our market, which is getting better, but we are monitoring on a regular basis, and it's not as strong as it used to be. 4, in my experience, is not going to adversely affect. And again, we will have to show that there is a demand. We're going to determine demand because part of this agreement is that the land trust, and we will support them and help them, but the land trust is going to qualify low and moderate income homeowners for this project. If they don't have a list of qualified candidates, then we're not going to go forward.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you, John. And I believe we do have Mr. with us, who is in the audience as well, or another member of the Monetary Community Land Trust that would like to say a few words. Any last questions for Mr. Zakian before we turn him away? Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you.
Come forward, and if you would state your name and also title and address for the record, please.
My name is Willie Soderholm. I am the board chair of the Minot Area Community Land Trust. And my address, you wanted my address, is 1705 Terrace Court in Minot.
And I'm George Withus, and my address is 10 7th Street Northwest, and I'm also a board member.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor Sibma, and also Alderman Strait and Alderman Walski. I appreciate your questions. Just to clarify, or just to piggyback off of the answer regarding the the Grand Forks issue that you might have, is that I've been a part of the Minot Area Community Land Trust from day one. And from day one, we put together a local board, and then the board members were made up of, I'm the director of the community action here in Minot, and we have an attorney that's part of the board, and then we also had a few other ones that, as far as the community. Forgive me, I am a little bit nervous here.
Oh, don't worry about
talking about this. So, but anyway, like I said, I've been part of this from the very beginning, and we are local control. The only reason that we really have Grand Forks in there is for their expertise. Is that it'll always continue to be a Minot entity. And I would almost look at it as it's more of support services that we're receiving from Grand Forks. Is that Emily Contreras? She has 12 and a half years experience with the Grand Forks Community Land Trust, and they went through the flood there, so they have a very good background with that with this. But the control will always be here in Minot. The information or the expertise that we get from Grand Forks will be just that. But all the decisions will be made by the board here in Minot. And a lot of the decisions, the majority of the decisions as far as the properties, anything like that, will all take place here in Minot. So I think I noticed that too when I looked at the agenda, and I appreciate your question on that. Is that that was a concern of mine? Is the way that was written, and it really is not that at all. It's just the support services that we will be receiving from them. So.
And I just wanted to add one more thing, and this is to Alderman Walski about the market. These are single-family homes that we are dealing with. It's not like multiple-family homes, apartment buildings, or anything like that. And then when somebody buys from the Community Land Trust, they actually only pay what they can afford. So the house may be worth $250,000 on the market, but they may be only able to afford $100,000. So that's what they're paying. It's based on 30% of their income. So it's not really going to hurt the market. They probably wouldn't be able to afford to buy a house anyplace else. It's for those type of people that need a single-family home and can't really afford it. So,
any further questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Further discussion on the item? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 8.6, City Council approval for extension of Beyond Shelter, Inc. Developer Agreement. Continuation from the previous council meeting, I believe.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Straight,
Second.
second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the issue. Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sima, thanks. I'm going to ask that Mr. Zakian step back up here. John, I'm sure you watched the video last month and heard the concerns expressed by the Magic City Apartment Association. I would invite you to comment on this in general, but as a specific question, what would happen, what's the scenario you envision if this were not approved? If the recommendation wasn't to advance this contract wasn't, and we simply let the current situations continue in its current form?
The Mayor Sitma, Alderman Walski, I would tell you HUD would not be happy. We have really pushed the envelope on the NDR program with HUD. They're still happy with us. The mayor in his State of the City address noted that. We are one of the highest rated of the grantees. However, when we ask for adjustments in how we're going to use funds, HUD gets very antsy, and it's not just us, it's in general. And if you recall, we pushed hard back with your support, I did this, and HUD agreed to a technical amendment. Now, I can't say it's the only one, but I can say, just as the substantial amendment for the gathering place was the only one, and still is the only one as a substantial amendment, we were the first to get a significant technical amendment approved by HUD for the NDR program among the 13 grantees. The technical amendment's core change was to shift what had been the city's original commitment to only build new multifamily housing and only build new single-family housing, to do a combination of rehab and new. If we don't show HUD at least a good faith effort on our part to move forward in a reasonable basis on both promoting construction of new single-family housing at some level and new multifamily housing at some level, we're going to get significant pushback from HUD. I would say in that case, and I wanted to caveat it, I can go back to HUD and have more conversations. I don't think it would be a very good conversation with HUD. I also feel that they would probably come back to us and say that we should take, well, it would be our choice, but the conversation would result in the option only being to go after legally beyond shelter. And I don't think that would turn out well, especially them being a very well-established nonprofit community development housing organization.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. Further discussion or further questions? Yes, Alderman Janser.
Mr. Zakian, so under this proposal, I guess just to clarify, so Beyond Shelter was supposed to create additional units, which they have yet to create. Is that accurate?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Chancellor, yes, that's accurate.
Okay. And so as opposed to terminating this development agreement, as might be the case with some others that we've encountered, we're sort of extending the opportunity over time further, or continuing options for both parties. Would that be a fairly accurate description of the recommendation?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Janser, yes, and I would like to amplify the yes, because I think it would be important. This has value for us on two levels, and when I get finished, I hope you all see that this does not in any way create a situation where we're going to adversely affect or impact the multifamily rental market. First of all, HUD in general, for its entire existence, has welcomed grantees identifying flaws in their past practices. And they actually consider them good grantees going forward if they demonstrate to HUD that they learn from their mistakes or their errors or their omissions. And when they come up with a situation similar, they take constructive, positive action. This is an example that we can show to HUD that we learned from past mistakes and that we took an affirmative action going forward to continue to meet an objective. The second piece, and again, I really apologize for not being here at the last meeting because I think a lot of the angst that might have been shared with you was unnecessary. This agreement, all it says is that Beyond Shelter, under a considerable amount of control by the city, which to their credit they have accepted, we're going to give 4 years. Well, it's really 3 years, because we need it, if it's going to happen, it has to be under construction in 3 years. We're going to give it 3 more years to build 39 units. That's all we're talking about. No more than 39 units of multifamily rental housing new. In a city that has, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 8,700 multifamily rental units and does not count mobile homes, which is about approximately another 1,700. 39 units is nothing. It is not a lot. But that being said, we are not going to, we meaning the city, and I will have to come back to you again. This is only step one. There's a step two. If, for instance, we're going to use NDR funds to fund this going forward, first of all, we're going to have to establish that there is a market for low and moderate income tenants to fill those 39 units. And then we're going to have to come back to you to authorize the expenditure of those funds and authorize the budget. Similarly, if the decision is to pursue low-income housing tax credits, and to their credit, they twice did that during the existence of the original development agreement. And the state decided not to approve them for a variety of reasons, mostly because there were other higher-rated competing applicants. There's 2 more opportunities in this next 3 to 4 year period where they could apply for those. That will also require the city council's approval, and we will also have to demonstrate that there is a market and a likelihood to fill those 39 units. I will also say one last thing. HUD will never allow us, or HUD would not take kindly, whether it's single family or multifamily, spend any money without being able, on either of those types of housing, without being able to demonstrate we can fill them. So there are considerable checks and balances in this. We don't go forward until the market shows it can. We have 3 years to try to, to keep monitoring and see that happens. One of the built-in requirements in the subrecipient agreement is that we will meet with Beyond Shelter on a quarterly basis. And one of the core reasons for that meeting will be to assess the market. It will also be to assess the likelihood of even applying for the low-income housing tax credit round of competition, or to be able to put together a budget that they could demonstrate they could maintain operations on an ongoing basis if we were to use NDR funds to construct.
If I may.
Continuation.
Thank you for that elaboration, John. Do you know currently how many LMI apartments there are in Minot? Or ballpark? I'm not looking for necessarily an exact number.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Janser, I have scoured over the past 2 weeks, actually since I did watch this council meeting, all types of sources of data. And the answer is no, there is no reliable data right now available. I can tell you there are certain measurable items. For instance, Park South, which is our first project where we rehabilitated 35 units of low and moderate income housing, they only have 1 vacancy, and that's now a completed project. The current Beyond Shelter building that was constructed is running at a vacancy rate between 7 and 10%. The Minot Housing Authority has a waiting list. Now, that waiting list is for low and moderate income tenants. They're looking for an assistance either through such sources as what's known as the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. So there clearly is a need out there. The question is whether or not that need can be filled by existing housing or by having to construct new low and moderate income housing. And that's one of the challenges we will be grappling as we go forward.
Okay. And then one final point. So those units and these additional 39 units that would be built under this agreement, how long do they have to maintain rents at the LMI rate?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Janser, 20 years.
Okay, 20. So they need to maintain the LMI rates for 20 years, regardless of what the market does.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma. Mr. Zakian, Are we talking 39 apartment units here? Are we talking about 39 individual, forgive me if I missed this in the memo, are we talking about 39 individual homes?
No, Mayor Sim, Alderman Chair, we're talking about a building with 39 multifamily rental units.
That's what I thought. So, Mr. Mayor, John, to Alderman Janser's point, do we have any idea of homes that are in this community that are priced at a lower level, more closely aligned with someone who might be looking to move from LMI housing to their own home? Do we have any statistics on those homes, how many there might be in this community? I'm also thinking of, obviously, within this greater conversation about housing, of all of the homes still in the flooded areas that have not been overly developed or in, being repossessed. Do we have any statistics on that, John?
Mayor Sidmer, Alderman Straight, no, again, that's another data source that very frustratingly we do not. It's one of the many data sources I'm working on with city staff and CDM Smith to try to come up with, and also the Service Basin Planning Council, to try to come up with data sources. I do know that we are reaching out whenever we do buyouts that include tenants. We are reaching out to them and offering them the opportunity to use the gap financing to become a homeowner. We're also doing the reverse. We're also telling homeowners that want to no longer take on the ownership of a home the opportunity they also will qualify for low and moderate income rental. I will tell you that one of the qualified applicants for gap financing is a tenant to own a home.
Sure. Further questions? Yes, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. John, is there, within this agreement, this one, this item 8.6 versus 8.5, is there an option for rehab with any of these funds, or is this strictly new construction?
Mayor Simmer, Alderman Pittner, no, for this one, because it's starting from an original basis. This one is for new construction.
Continuation. And then we talked about an extension. The construction would have to happen within 3 years. What if we get to that point in 3 years from now and nothing's changed, the market, there's no demand? Where do we find ourselves at that point looking forward?
Then I think we have, Mayor Sidmer, Alderman Pittner, then I think we have an extremely strong case that HUD can't criticize us for not making the extra effort.
Okay.
Continue.
And I guess just some final thoughts and why I find it hard for myself to maybe support this item versus the previous. I think rehabbing of existing properties and at a low to moderate income is a good idea in our community. Right now, with as been reiterated and identified, we don't seem to have a demand for new construction. We are seeing some of the private sector take some of that up with some of the developments around town, developing areas, and then investing and broadening our tax base. And that's where, again, we had some individuals at last meeting speak out in objection to this, and I think some of those concerns are warranted with the vacancy rates we do see, and to saturate the market with more low to moderate income housing, people that are, frankly, this is for some people, this is their way of life, for whether it be rental income or providing a service in that way, and then to dilute their investment on top of one of the hot button items over the past couple of years is property taxes and increases that we've seen, to dilute their investment and their level of income even further. I find it hard to kind of invest into this project other than, I guess, strictly the optics of it to look good to HUD. That's my thoughts, I guess.
Further questions for Mr. Zakian? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Simmet. John, do we have any idea of how many buyouts are going to take place in Phase 5 and beyond? I'll try to cycle back to how this plays back into my thinking here.
Sure. Mayor Sidmer, Alderman Straight, yes, we estimate somewhere around 200.
Okay.
Further questions, Alderman Wolski?
Again, thank you for standing in there tonight, John. If this particular issue moves forward, would it come back in front of us again for some authorization at some point, or is this the type of thing that could get greenlit behind the scenes?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski, it's specifically designed that whichever route we take, it has to come back to this council.
Okay. Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, just a comment on all of this. I've been on the council for a number of years, and right after I was first elected, we were going through a time in our city where rental prices were increasing at a very rapid rate. And I was called by a number of women, many single moms, to meet with me because the apartments that they were living in at the time, the apartment rates were doubling, and they couldn't afford it. It affected 37 children in one apartment complex because the rents were going so high. And it was because of Beyond Shelter that they were afforded housing a little bit later on that they could be in. It was new housing, it was comfortable for them. Their children were able to stay in the school that they needed to stay in. And so even though I'm empathetic to our property owners, I understand that they are relying on the income base from the rentals. I have to think of those women first. And I don't want to see us in a situation again where rents can just be up and down so much that it impacts those single moms. So I will certainly be voting to approve this.
Further questions for Mr. Zakian? I think our city manager has some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple comments on this that might help the council with the amendment to this agreement. First of all, these folks were approved some time ago. They have been unable to fulfill the requirements in the original agreement. And John, correct me if I'm wrong in any of this. So we are making an amendment to that agreement to allow them to come into compliance. This is the same offer we've made to others that have failed to come into compliance with their agreements, and unfortunately in some of those cases they have been unwilling to come into alignment, and therefore the city has taken legal action against them. So this is different than that. The second thing is that these are obligations that were already approved. This is just an extension to allow the continuation of this project to go forward without having to take any additional legal action against this particular applicant. And then one other maybe point of context which might be helpful to the council. Our NDR, Natural Disaster Resiliency Competition, was based in an extreme part on low to moderate income housing demand and needs for our community. And yes, times have changed, that is true, but make no mistake, the reason the city's application scored so well are because of those tenants. And as we continue to undermine the very tenets of the application, which allowed us to receive the $74.3 million, we jeopardize the other program components of the NDR application. And while we may want to see a gathering space or a CTE or a new city hall or these other sorts of things, we must be conscientious that we have obligations under agreement with HUD that we would also fulfill the obligations to the low to moderate income housing demands and needs that were set for our community at the time. So I just put that in context just because we can't cherry pick what we want in the NDR agreement. We have to honor and fulfill all commitments. And if times have changed, we may be able to make some adjustments to those, but we must be cognizant that market adjustments may compromise our ability to remain effective on other program components of the NDR application.
Further questions for Mr. Zakian? Alderman Pittner.
Just maybe for a bit of, thank you, Mayor. John, just maybe for a bit of understanding, why, I guess, would a 3-year extension, why is HUD would not be satisfied with getting to the end of this agreement to have to amend to extend? Why, I mean, if that makes sense.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner. HUD, it's a balance with HUD. And again, I'm speaking from experience. If we demonstrate that we make all possible good efforts to accomplish something and make all reasoned and reasonable attempts to accomplish a goal, and because of a variety of reasons, one of which can be market, it can't be accomplished, HUD accepts that explanation. In this case, we still, put yourself in HUD's mindset. We have, as the city manager has pointed out, we made a promise. I understand the market has changed, but we made a promise, and it was the highest scoring part of the application. We made a promise to build new housing, single family and multifamily. HUD's going to look to us to at least make a reasoned and reasonable effort to go forward with the NDR program to demonstrate that we made every possible reasonable effort to accomplish that. And that's all this agreement does. Again, I want to reiterate, we are not, if you approve this today, there's no housing being built tomorrow. What it is saying is that we are going to continue that reasonable effort for the next 3 years because we have until 2022. If the market doesn't continue to uptick in the next 3 years, then we cannot reasonably justify building 39 units of multifamily housing and having it occupied and be operationally sound for the next 20 years as LMI housing. We cannot go forward. And as long as we can show HUD that we continue that due diligence, and by the way, that's one of the reasons why I built in and they agreed to, we're going to meet every quarter for the next 3 years. We're going to have a documented record for HUD so that when we get to the end of the 3 years, if we haven't been able to build it, we can show HUD that we made every possible reasonable effort to meet this obligation on the NDR. The market simply wouldn't allow us to do it.
And I also would also like to reiterate that it was HUD 2 that gave the city an extension of several years, seeing as the original timeframe was much, much tighter when the NDR applicants and the other ones that are held to a much even higher standard in terms of their timeframes. We were the ones that did get the extension because of, well, it's just called geographical complications of days like today. So they already have granted us some extensions in due diligence to try to give us the ability to accomplish what it was that we said we were going to do when we made application. I can appreciate this because there are still further pieces that have to come before us before it moves any further. But to continue on saying good faith and effort, I think that this is important because this isn't the final step, as Mr. Zakian put it, that construction doesn't start tomorrow, but it is following through the process that we outlined that we said that we were going to do. Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seem to remember, and I didn't get a chance to go back and try to find it, but it seems to me that and it may be multiple years ago now, we received a study about low to middle income housing needs, and it was, I believe, kind of forward looking, which at that time, and I don't know if anybody can tell me offhand, how long ago that study was or how old the data was that it was based on. But at that time, anticipating some growth in the community and considering that what the market was at that time, that even though there were a number of apartments being built, that I believe the study indicated that there was still a need for low to middle income types of housing, perhaps both single family and multifamily. I'm wondering, Johnny, do you remember that? And it might have been before your time, actually. Have you seen that? And if it is, old enough to where maybe it's time to, renew that study, it might be helpful with some of this. I don't remember whether a consultant did that or whether that was something that was done internally, but might be worth a look.
Mayor Sitman, Alderman Janser, I am aware of it. It was long before my time. It was actually, it was using 2015, 2016 data. It was, I believe, the first NDR funded project, and it was done by CDM Smith. And it did take into account the trends at the time. And it did show that there would be significant potential need for additional low and moderate income housing. An element of it also took into account that there would be what's, lack of a better term, artificially created demand, which goes back to a question that Alderman Straight asked, which is the buyouts. And that is going to continue over the next 2 or 3 years. And in fairness to the overall picture, we have to continue to show HUD that as we continue to do buyouts, and especially buyouts that affect tenants, that we're making, again, the due diligent effort to make sure that all tenants, including the low and moderate income tenants, have the ability to pay for and relocate out of that housing into newer housing, better housing, and more quality housing. So it's all together. it's possible that going forward, we could review that and bring it adjusted upward, but all the funding for that particular project was spent at the time. I believe it was about $240,000, and it was the first NDR planning project.
Thank you.
Further questions? Alderman Patrugula.
Just a comment. John and I spoke about these issues at length over the telephone a few days ago, and I was very satisfied and reassured by what I heard, which is essentially what's been presented today. And I just, for the record, want to be absolutely sure about this, that our going ahead with this is essentially an insurance policy. It protects us against the company. It protects us, importantly, against HUD. It protects low and moderate income people who in the future, if they appear and need to have housing, would have that available. It by no means would lead to the construction of any number of units. It's no commitment toward that. It's just being ready if that eventuality should come out. It by no means would flood, if you forgive my expression, the market with 39 more houses or apartment units, which it doesn't need right now. Am I correct in that understanding, Mr. Zakian?
Alderman Sitma, Mayor Sitma, Alderman, I think I've been up here too long. Alderman Patrugula, that's exactly correct.
Thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Zakian? One last question.
Not a question, but if we want to let Mr. Zakian sit down, I have a couple brief comments.
Catch some water. We'll see you in a minute.
Okay.
Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. I'm going to support this issue tonight. I know that the concerns expressed by those from the Apartment Association are legitimate. I appreciate them, but I do not think this is a case of entering the market, and certainly not without an enormous amount of discretion and thought given to it if we get to that point in the future when it comes back in front of us. More holistically, on the larger concept, there was a part of this location that got my attention because we have LMI housing in a location that does not seem to be served by our public transit system. I think that's something we want to kind of keep an eye on in the future as we develop these particular places. If we develop these types of particular places, I think it would make sense to make sure that our city bus system is passing fairly close because I feel like that's a service that would also be beneficial in improving these properties and providing services to these types of individuals. Also, somewhat holistically, I think I'm becoming more concerned about the amount of property that is being excluded from paying property taxes because it's operating under a nonprofit status. Mr. Turnus, I thought I saw him back there, I'm not sure, but I don't know if we have the ability to pull that information together to get a sense of how much property within the city is not subject to property tax because of these types of uses. But I would like to see that information if we can get it pulled together. So I'm simply going to offer that request. Mr. Turnus, if you'd like to comment, by all means. But
good evening, Mr. Turnus.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Walski, the good news is a project like this now would not be totally tax exempt. All low-income properties that don't pay property tax pay what's called a pilot tax, payment in lieu of tax. So they basically pay 5% of their rents after the utilities have been subtracted. So when we rough it out, it looks like some of these, in fact, several of the current Beyond Shelter programs are paying, I would say, estimated between 50 and 70% of what they normally would pay on property tax. So it's, years ago it was free, but Section 43 in the code has taken care of that. Okay. We can provide you any other information you're asking. Okay.
Alderman Straight, did you have any further comments?
I guess, thank you, Mr. Mayor. From my standpoint, I raised the question last month, and Mr. Zakian, I'm going to apologize for my behavior last month. If you were in attendance in the audience, my behavior was horrendous, and I was upset that Mr. Zakian was not here, so I'm going to publicly apologize to you right now, Mr. Zakian. I guess, Mr. Mayor, my comment is maybe multifold, but I'm also just considering the future. We're going to relocate a number of folks that may or may not qualify into LMI moving forward. And I appreciate the folks that have reached out saying we don't need more housing. I get it. I think we hear those numbers all the time. I think we're trying to be very mindful to that dynamic. I'm also very mindful, Mr. Mayor, of the committee that Alderman Padragula and I sit on, of yours, of the Mayor's Committee on Addiction. Just because there's a lot of apartments on the market doesn't necessarily mean that they are trying to appeal to the people that need housing the most. And sometimes some of these folks that qualify are folks that have unfortunately had problems with the law, have problems with addiction, can't get housing. So I think we have to be mindful of that picture as well. I clearly recognize we have 1,400 plus apartments on the, we hear these statistics, but I'm also well aware what I heard Mr. Zakian say is there's no drop in folks applying for services. So what it also tells me is we have absolutely no data, really. We're just kind of piecemealing. We're going at one project here. We get a number of phone calls saying we don't need more of this. So I guess I'm trying to kind of look at the bigger picture, be kind of mindful of the fact that we have folks that are on the bottom that are really having a hard time, sir, because of that Mayor's Committee on Addiction, that are just really struggling to find housing. And we don't have, some of the larger developers in town don't have programs to offer. It can be programs like Beyond Shelter that might be able to deal on some level. And I guess the one thought that I was having with Alderman Walski's comments is, this is a project in Northwest Minot, correct? And I have no idea how near, dear, far that might be from the proposed Park District land that we were talking about that Mr. Walski was also saying being mindful of. But I like the idea, if it comes to fruition and if it's needed, that we might have a fantastic park on the horizon that ties into that. So these are all things that if you look at it, in its own little silo, it might seem that it fits just like this because of the phone calls that we get that are always in opposition. But I think if you look at the greater context of the conversation that we're trying to have, to your point, Mr. Mayor, of future forward, I think we have to be mindful of that. And that's why the stew that enters into it. And I guess my final thought is I've been communicating with Mr. Turnus. I've been renovating a fourplex for the last number of years. I'm trying to turn it back into a single family home. I think we also have to be mindful of people that are trying to also clean up some areas of town that may have been problems because we've changed over the years. We've had apartments that have gone into residential areas. So we're trying to kind of combat this on many different fronts. And so I think that we just have to keep that in mind as these conversations come forward. So Mr. Zakian, I appreciate the perspective, and I'm going to fully support this tonight. And with the idea that we're going to reevaluate this over the next, well, at least my 15 months remaining here on City Council. Sorry for the rant, but that's the passion that plays out. So.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. We have spent a considerable amount of time. Alderman Pittner, final thoughts.
Final thoughts, Mayor. Thank you. And again, with some of Mr. Zakian's comments on this item, stating that this isn't necessarily a green light for construction, but to piggyback off of some of Alderman Straight's comments, that we don't have the data to support this one way or the other. And I think if moving forward with this item in the future, if a green light were ever to be requested, I'd like to see some very hard numbers on a demand for this, because just because it gets to the end of an agreement, a deadline, I don't think that's necessarily a demand, and I hope that's not the case. If a demand does arise, I hope we see some hard numbers brought to us to support this item moving forward.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner. Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Motion approved. That takes us to 8.7, the proposed ordinance line items over budget. Department budgets must reflect the correct amounts for the 2018 CAFR. Adjustments are necessary, so no department reports amount that were not appropriated.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the item. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion is approved. Takes us to number 9, department presentation for the NDR. National Disaster Resiliency Grant Program Manager is back with us. Rejuvenated. Mr. Zakian, the floor is yours.
Derek? Okay. Thank you. Mayor, Alderman, this is what I was going to present to you at the last meeting, and I certainly do encourage comments and questions. Alderman Strait, I appreciate what you just said, but I take all of your passion very seriously, and I accept it. I will say, Mayor Sitma and all of you, this is kind of going off topic for 1 second, but I, as well as my colleagues, all understand the intense pressure you are under. We are still in a post-flood environment. We are still dealing with a number of issues, and I hate to tell you this, but the reality is that's why you have me here. We're going to continue to be dealing with these for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. And the discussion in the last agenda item just gives you an example of the serious decisions and issues we have to grapple with. So again, I just wanted to say I certainly appreciate your comments, Alderman Strait, and what others have said to me, but I truly do understand the demands and challenges and passion that's involved in this. The good news is that the city of Minot is not an entitlement city, but you have received 3 different grants totaling almost $180 million. There is no city or county in the United States that has had so much success in securing these community development block grant disaster recovery grants that is not an entitlement city or county, as has Minot. And I think it cannot ever be said enough. It's to your credit, it's to your credit of your predecessors, and it's to the credit of this community. Along with that come a number of challenges. Do I have to do something, or? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, magic. I apologize. No wonder I was getting strange looks from some of you. These are the 3 grants. The reason I put them up there is that while the overarching rules and regulations and statutes govern all 3 grants, I think it's important to remind you and the public that each grant comes with its own different set of regulations and its own different set of rules. And one of my challenges is to make sure that we stay in line, depending on the grant, with each of the rules and regulations. I will also tell you, if you point out I would like to point out the most important element here are the deadlines. We are coming up on a deadline on allocation 2, which is the $35 million. We have to have all that money spent by July 19th, 2019. Any money not spent will revert back to HUD. I am pleased to report to you that as I sit here today, we are under $300,000. And we have begun to really aggressively work with the finance department to make sure that when we reach the July 19th, 2019 deadline, we will have spent all that money. We literally, if you think about it in the context of $35 million, we're under 1%.
John?
Yes.
I want to interrupt just briefly, and this might be extremely nitpicky, but in the future, can we, when we refer to this, can we say we're going to use those dollars constructively rather than spend?
Sure.
I think that's a concern shared within the community, and so I just wanted to.
Fair enough. In fact, I would go one step further. We'll be sure to use all these funds productively and constructively for the future of Minot. The original grant, there is no deadline, and we still have a balance of approximately $3 to $3.5 million, which we're holding in abeyance. As we move forward, there may be other issues that come up that we did not contemplate, that we may be able to use those funds for. So we're in no rush to spend that money. And the other thing is that obviously September 30th, 2020 is that red light that keeps flashing. That's why we're concentrating almost all of our attention to the NDR funds. I will tell you that we have, and you had approved this earlier, about a year ago, we have reallocated $1.75 million in allocation 1 to fund the final piece of the Northern Sewer Project, which was initiated as a result of the flood. We're hoping to have all the environmental done on that project before the construction season ends this year, so that Public Works can then move forward with that project. I'm not going to test you on this. This is not an eyesight test. I just wanted to give you an example of how finite we're doing the line item budget accounting. This is allocation 1, this is allocation 2, and this is allocation 3. So we're not just, I thought it was important to get across to you, and this is all being done in concert with the finance department and to the public. We are accounting by activity and by budget and by what are called budget buckets. We are accounting internally and to HUD every penny of money that is used on projects and activities to recover from the flood. And this is the type of reporting we're doing and the type of tracking we're doing. And what did I just do? Obviously, one of the sensitive subjects, and I understand the expectations. To be fair, we've kind of elevated the expectations ourselves with this project, the downtown gathering place. I did want to briefly spend a couple of minutes just to give a perspective on how far we've come and how much all the support you have given has allowed us to advance forward. Shortly after I got here, we realized that there were 2 major pivots we had to do to make this project a reality. The 2 pivots were, we did not have a site. Originally, when the plan was first approved in 2016, it was believed there was a site selected, and it was actually noted in the action plan. And then the other was that we were not going to, because of that, we were not going to have to spend any money on acquisition, which is an activity under the HUD rules. So what we've had to do to make sure this project becomes a reality and moves forward, we had to do 2 significant steps. We had to get the first and only substantial amendment that NDR grantees have received. Now, normally that takes 4 to 6 months. We accomplished that in less than 3 months. And that was with all of your support and your expeditious approvals of the process. The other is that we had to come up with a process that was acceptable to HUD to select sites which could be options for the gathering place. This is a public infrastructure project, a park. I will tell you that although the language is vague, HUD does not like to see its eminent domain authority used for parks. What they do like to see is that acquisitions occur under a voluntary acquisition program. The process that we compressed that normally takes 9 months and we compressed into 4 months was to come up with a set of criteria, pick optional sites, and again, to all of your credit, and I'm going to give a shout out back to Alderman Straight because he was actively involved in this and helped us advance this project forward, especially in the site selection. You also served on the technical committee, which is extremely important. But all of you helped advance this. Your approvals allowed us to move forward. I don't want to dwell on it, but I just wanted to give you some context. So we have, at every point in the process, fast-track this to get us to a point where hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, in the next 2 weeks or less than the next 2 weeks, we will get that much anticipated release of funds. When we get the release of funds, we can immediately go forward with the gathering place. I will tell you that we already have positioned offers to be made to all the property owners. Literally, the day we receive the release of funds, we can send out the initial offer letters. And the day we receive the release of funds, we will also be able to send a draft subrecipient agreement for negotiations to the Park District for the design and construction of this project. So all that before, unless, now the only caveat is that HUD is playing scramble. HUD was one of the agencies, unfortunately, that was shut down. So they're now playing scramble, and they're trying to catch back up. I've already had some conversations with the HUD reps. They do sound like they're really trying to fast track everything. So I'm optimistic that we will continue to be on schedule on this. We have to deal, and again, this goes to all three grants. We have to deal with significant mandates to spend all this money. And I think it's important that everybody understand what those mandates are. We have to meet a national objective. That's why you always hear me saying we either have to meet urgent need, low and moderate income, or in the case of this one initiative we've done, the spotlight to get rid of the zombie homes. Every activity, every penny spent in all three grants, except for admin money, has to meet a national objective to be compliant. We also have to make sure that every penny we spent, constructively and productively, is tied back to the flood. Now, it can be either directly or indirectly, but there has to be a relationship between the flood impact and what we're spending the money on. And I think as you've learned, as we've had dialogue individually and collectively, there is a wide range of options and opportunities for us, but at the end of the day, we still have to be able to demonstrate that every penny we spend has somehow responded to an issue related from the flood. We also have to demonstrate that we're meeting an unmet need. Now, what hasn't been spoken a lot is that one of the core elements of the action plan that was submitted to HUD as part of the NDRC Phase 2 application is we had to make a case for unmet need in all elements and aspects. The most common one is low and moderate income residents and how they've been impacted, vulnerable populations. And once that's submitted and approved, that becomes a governing document for us as well. And we have to be able to show that any activity that we're spending money on is related to an unmet need that was not addressed from other funding sources at the time the action plan was approved. The only other thing I would point out, which I haven't really raised with you because we're on track and I'm comfortable we're going to meet it, there is a requirement that 51% of the NDR funds have to be spent directly in benefit to low and moderate income residents. We are currently reporting 60%. I believe at the end of this process, all the projects and activities we undertake will probably stay at about 60%. For transparency, there is a very rare waiver granted. The city was able several years ago to get the waiver for allocation 2. So we dropped below 51%. But for allocation 1 and for NDR, it's 51%. I know that a lot of people are antsy about seeing more tangible results. With the nature of HUD funds, actually with the nature of any federal funds, there's a lot of preparation and planning work that has to take place before you can actually go forward. 2018, and again, to your credit, the City Council and the Mayor, you kept giving me your approvals, which allowed us to move forward. We are now positioned for 2019 to show a lot of accomplishments. The gathering place, low and moderate income home ownership, low and moderate income rental. For the moment, it's rehab. The continuation of the acquisitions, moving forward with the City Hall project, and we're continuing to move forward with the family homeless shelter. We're having discussions with the Lutheran Social Services, which is taking the lead on this, and we're continuing to move that project forward too. But again, a lot of what we did, and I know I brought a lot of items to you, it was all based on the process we have to follow to demonstrate to HUD that we're following all the guidelines and we're putting everything into place to be able to undertake the activities. And again, 2019, 2020, we're now in a position where we can advance a lot of these projects, and there's going to be a lot more spending of money. I will tell you, that we continue to show that we're one of the highest tracking spenders of the NDRC money among the 13 grantees. I have every reason to believe that based on what we're seeing for 2019, that we're going to continue to do that. Remember, as we move forward with projects, whether it's additional acquisitions, with the gathering space, with the gap financing program that we continue to qualify people for, we're going to continue to spend money, which is going to continue to elevate our track record. The current activities that we're moving forward on with allocations 1 and 2 are eradicating the spot blight. I just mentioned to you the final phase of the Northern Sewer project, the Small Business Revolving Loan Fund, which I'm still moving forward on a process that's a lot of planning and process in place. My goal is to have that operational by early spring, and that would be for small businesses, not only in the downtown, but in areas like Oak Park that were clearly impacted. And again, one of the primary activities with the support of the Finance Department is going to be the closeout of Allocation 2. I would say that our ability to accomplish a closeout of Allocation 2 will further reinforce to HUD their belief that we are a good grantee. HUD has an internal tracking system, and I've never quite understood it. But to echo what Mayor Sitma said at the State of the City address, we have been repeatedly told, as recently as the Atlanta Training Conference in December, that we are now considered a good grantee. HUD does not feel the necessity to come here to either audit us or monitor us. I would not be surprised if we do not see them in 2019. That does not mean we're not going to be as vigilant, and I'm not going to be, as city staff can attest, a pain in the butt to make sure that we are continuing to be compliant, but it does put us in a very good place with HUD. On an ongoing basis, which is not really publicized, but I thought I wanted to highlight to you, the reason that we're a good grantee and we're in good stead with HUD is because we've demonstrated to them that all of what are called the below-the-radar activities that they look to grantees to have, we are doing, and we're doing in a very robust and aggressive way. And I do want to give credit to the Finance Department. I also want to give credit to the Public Works Department, and also to Chris Owen, who's our compliance monitoring officer and project coordinator, and also to CDM Smith. We've clearly hit stride. We increasingly have the city taking over roles and responsibilities from CDM Smith. We've really morphed this relationship into what HUD had always wanted it to be, which is CDM Smith provides us with support. We provide the leadership. We establish the policies. We carry out the policies. Along those lines, compliance monitoring is very, very important. We have 2 entities now that do ongoing monitoring internally. One is Chris, and the other is our internal auditor, Gene Stein. They do separate auditing and monitoring. They're on separate tracks. It's exactly as HUD envisions it. What it allows us to do is catch errors before it becomes a problem and then immediately fix them. And HUD's, and I think you've heard me say this, but HUD's position is that if a grantee demonstrates that they have robust compliance and audit processes and that they catch mistakes and then they fix them and they show going forward they don't make those same mistakes, we're not even going to get slapped on the hand in the future. So that's why that's so much important. The rest of these are in support of that. One of the key things, going back to, because I know this is a subject that is constantly under review, there is an ongoing basis where we're clearly establishing protocols to continue to hand off roles that CDM Smith did in the beginning and did up until several years ago, and that we're now taking on for the city. What that also means is that where they still have a robust presence, but we're reducing the funding cost that's associated with CDM Smith's support. And that allows us to add further money into actual constructive activities as we go forward. And then I know you've heard me say this, but I just wanted to reiterate. Unfortunately, and this is not only true for HUD, but it's true for all federal grants, there are certain federal laws that we have to abide by. The National Environmental Protection Act, Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Act, the National Flood Insurance Program. The city manager noted in his report that we're being very aggressive and doing very well and trying to get our rating within the flood area to minimize the increase that property owners are going to receive when the flood insurance program kicks in with the final firm match, the FEMA insurance maps. We are part of that process, and we have to make sure that everything we're doing supports the city's efforts. That is both with acquisitions and also with the projects we do, whether it's rehabbing, single-family or multifamily. The one I wanted to highlight, because it is important, and I didn't want you to think that I keep throwing this up as an excuse. We are dealing with 6 different sets of individual rules covering the 3 separate grants. And it's multiplier. For allocation 1, it's 2 sets of rules. When we get to NDR, we're dealing with 5 of the 6 sets of rules. And these are in addition to all the other regulations that I've cited here. And that's it. I rushed it a little. I probably talked too much anyway, but I'd be glad to answer any questions anyone has.
Any questions for our NDR Director, Alderman Wolski?
I've got one here. John, the leverage requirement. I know it was before us last year in a couple of different items, but where do we sit? How do we stand? What's your sense of that at this point?
Mayor Sitmo, Alderman Wolski, as I understand it, and this isn't tracked the same way that spend rates are, but as I understand from my discussions with HUD, we are in the strongest position of all 13 grantees. And from my perspective, in terms of where we are versus where we have to be in 2022, we're in very good shape.
Continuation, sir. The ability to sort of count our flood protection investment long into the future, did that go the way we were hoping it was going to go? I know because obviously we aren't going to spend flood protection dollars by 2022 to the extent that I think maybe was suggested in some of the leverage discussions.
Mayor Sitmo, Alderman Wolski, the answer is we have it in writing that they approved our request. So we can go well into the future. I have to add, I know it was a very difficult decision for all of you on the Beyond Shelter proposal, but my answer to this question answers a lot of your questions on that one. When we can demonstrate to HUD how serious we take our commitments on the core issues, and are able to continue to try to move forward in a reasonable basis. When we come up with unusual situations, and this was certainly one, we have a good working relationship with HUD, and HUD is confident and feels capable of giving us what we're requesting. And in this case, yes, what we were looking for, which is actually 30 years. The city commitment, we now have 30 years to meet it on the leverage.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sitman. John, can you tell us what's remaining in that bucket that went into funding the IEDC report? If you don't have that dollar amount that's left in that NDR bucket right now, I'd be curious to know that tomorrow night, maybe.
Mayor Sitmo, Alderman Straight, I can get you the exact number tomorrow, but going out of memory, there's at least $150,000 remaining in that.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. John, can you what does it look like after the city signs a subrecipient agreement with the Park District for the gathering space? We hear that term a lot, and I have to admit that what happens after that from the City of Minot's role in these projects, be it the gathering space, the homeless shelter, what does that mean then?
Mayor Sitmo, Alderman Straight, well, we won't get into the nitty-gritty details because, again, I can't until we get the release of funds. But I can tell you that in terms of whatever the subrecipient agreement will look like for the design and construction, it will have built in that approvals are still going to be required by the city council, starting with the final design. Before that can be advanced, we'll have to come back to this council for approval. Once the construction is done, it then comes back to the city to figure out the next steps in terms of assuring it carries out the mission that we've represented in the action plan.
Yes. One more follow-up, Mr. Mayor. I guess, John, can you, this is my frustration with HUD, and I appreciate that we always have to kind of go walk up to this line and never cross it, but what I've heard tonight now is we're a good grantee, we're the best of the big spenders, which I always really appreciate that. To Alderman Walsky's point, clearly we're trying to spend the money thoughtfully, yes, productively, and I think that we clearly want to continue to push HUD. I have some concerns moving forward with the next phase of this project of how we're going to move HUD in the direction of how we're dealing with these voluntary acquisitions in terms of the gathering space. And I guess I just want to state it to you that as my partner in this project, as the liaison from this body, is I'm very much concerned about the idea that we are asking folks to volunteer their property. And I think that if we were any of those people with holding that property, who is going to want to participate in a voluntary acquisition if they don't know on the other end what their property is going to be utilized towards? So I'm not going to ask for that response, but we're going to have to work that one out with HUD, I feel like, because I feel like we're moving towards the next concrete block of frustration ahead. And
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Straight, actually, I can't answer that question.
Great.
That's not HUD.
Fantastic.
No. It's not going to be the answer you want. The Uniform Relocation Act dictates voluntary acquisition. They also dictate involuntary acquisition. The URA, and there are no waivers under the URA. And actually, believe it or not, the URA is administered by the Department of Transportation. Don't ask me the logic behind that. I can't tell you, but it's been that way for more than 25 years. The URA stipulates that when you're negotiating, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, with a property owner, you can only negotiate based on value of the property, current value. You cannot include any other factors in it. That's not to say we can't have public discussions going forward as to what we envision going on, but in terms of the one-on-one negotiations with the different property owners, it has to be straight up, here's what we think the value is, and they're going to, I hope, will come back and say, no, here's what we think the value is, and then we can negotiate. Now, the good news is that we're not constrained in our negotiations, so we can negotiate back and forth. So there is flexibility there under the voluntary side. But I appreciate your thoughts, and again, I'm sorry I wasn't here at the last meeting because I know you brought this up at the last meeting too. But in this case, and that's why that slide I showed, a lot of what we do is not actually regulated by HUD. The release of funds, for instance, that's not a HUD rule, that's the National Environmental Protection Act. And there's no waivers to that either. And in this case, when we do acquisitions, we're limited by the Uniform Relocation Act. But we'll do the best we can and be as flexible as we can within the constraints.
John, I appreciate you just answering questions because it's been a long time since we've had this discussion in the public, and I know it's been a long meeting, so thanks. It's helpful for the community to hear it.
Further questions for Mr. Zakian? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and I appreciate you letting me make the presentation tonight. Thank you.
That takes us to number 10 tonight. I wanted, this is the miscellaneous and discussion items. I wanted to take a brief opportunity to acknowledge some very fast work already being done by our street department after we received more than 11 inches of snow over in less than 24 hours, keeping the main arteries open, and understandably things don't happen ever as quick as many people would ever like, but understanding that we also live in North Dakota northern climate that oftentimes is unfairly compared to many other places. So I just wanted to say thank you to our street department. They're out there. They've been working long hours. We'll continue to as they get through the different residential areas in the next 24 and 48 hours, as we are expecting more snow over that period of time. So I just wanted to say thank you to them for their work and for the other folks that are helping their neighbors punch out their sidewalks and driveways too, because I've seen a tremendous amount of other people stepping up to help each other, as it's not normally our winter storms that we get in February like this, but we've definitely shown resolve to ensure that we're all doing the best that we can. Any other items that anybody wanted to talk about before we move on for discussion items? Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. I have 3 discussion items. They will be brief, I promise. I got a call from a constituent about concerns around Washington School. Chief, I think you may have also had a conversation with the same individual, but it was safety concerns on their 37th Street area, Lance, or excuse me, not Washington School, Hovind School. I get these confused. We'll talk offline about that, but I just kind of wanted to raise attention here because I know that I believe the gentleman will be listening tonight, and good faith expression that I would bring this issue forward. Second item, Saturday at the legislative forums, stood in and listened, and I think I've got a concern. I don't quite know where to address it, but I want to bring it here and maybe see what this body thinks. But I'm wondering if there's a way inside of these forums, and I understand the way that they are structured is to moderate and maintain the decorum, but there was a statement made that I think was maybe just a little bit misleading, and maybe not didn't reflect the status of the city's position on an issue that is currently in front of some moving through the legislature. And maybe, you know, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Barry, you guys would have the opportunity to perhaps reach out to the chamber and find out if there's a way to get a little bit of back and forth between maybe just us elected officials. You know, I think that might create an opportunity for a little bit more of a productive forum in that sense. Obviously, we want to maintain the decorum. We want our legislators to show up at these things, but as an elected official for a large constituency that's made up of all 4 of our local legislative districts, I want to make sure that we're getting the most out of those forums that we can. So I just wanted to offer that here today.
Thank you, Alderman Walski. Further discussion items before moving on? All right. That takes us to number 11 on our agenda, executive session. The next item on the agenda is an executive session for the following legal matter: First Western Bank and Trust versus the North Dakota Port Services and City of Minot, which is a pending civil litigation matter. The legal authority for closing this portion of the meeting is North Dakota Century Code Section 44-04-17.1, 19.1, and 19.2. The topic or purpose of this executive session is for an attorney consultation and discussion of potential litigation strategy and or guidance for negotiation strategy and negotiation instructions. At this time, a motion would be in order to discuss the next topic in executive session rather than in an open meeting. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Janser. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Any discussion on the motion to move into close executive session? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski. Sitma.
Yes. Motion carried. The executive session will be recorded, and all the members of the governing body are reminded to limit their discussion during the executive session to the announced topic. Any collective decision, collective commitment, or other final actions by the governing body must occur after it reconvenes in an open meeting unless final action is specifically required by law to be taken during the executive session. The prohibition on taking final action during the executive session does not apply to providing guidance or instructions to our attorney or negotiator. We will now ask the members of the public who are attending the meeting to leave the room, which all are right now. We anticipate adjourning the executive session and reconvening the open portion of the meeting in approximately 8 o'clock. The minutes will show that the executive session began at 7:33 p.m. and was attended by our Assistant City Attorney and our Finance Director and Public Information Officer, including our City Manager, City Attorney, and City Clerk.